Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more.
Taylor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. Today we're talking about diagnosing and focusing. And everybody always talks about how in sales we got to continue to get better, and get better. Today, we're going to talk about how to take that improvement into your own hands. So we're going to talk through some examples with Taylor of how she would approach it as a sales leader, but also we're going to have some examples of if you're an individual contributor, you don't have a sales leader, or you're rolling up to the founder, like some people, I know I've had AEs roll up to me and like they certainly didn't get this hands-on level of an experience. And so if you're one of those reps that's, I don't want to say orphaned, but has to take things into your own hands, we're going to have some great tactical pieces that you're going to be able to implement. First off, I'm going to stop talking. Second off, Taylor, why is it important to be able to diagnose and focus?
Yeah, I think we're lucky in that now in this sales world we live in, we have access to a lot of data. It can be very distracting, and especially with multiple sales leaders, multiple department priorities, the ever-changing landscape. We had COVID all of a sudden thrown at us, a global recession. The landscape is always changing, and there's just so much access to data, and it's hard to figure out, where to focus, how to get better, and how to adapt to that changing world. And so it's really important to be able to figure out, where is the one or two ways that I can improve? How do I get access to that data to figure out, how to actually get there, and how do I put a plan forward to make sure that, I am constantly improving and really adapting to that ever-changing world to make sure that I'm staying competitive as a salesperson or as a sales leader.
And so let's start through the lens of the sales leader first. If I've got a number of SDRs or AEs rolling up under me, where do you start? I'm like, yes, I 100% want to do this. Where does your process start? Where do you start?
Yeah. So it's hard, right? And so sales leaders now have access to, let's say, an example tech stack can be Gong, Clary, Outreach, Salesforce. And so, where do you start? That's a good question. For me, it is really about starting with a hunch and then validating and deciding if that's the right hunch to validate or if it's something else. And so a really basic example of that is, hey, my reps are not doing enough activity to create enough pipeline. That might be the hunch. And so, where I would go with that is, trying to figure out, there is Salesforce or Outreach with all the activity data in there. What is the person with the most amount of activity doing? Are they the top performer? Or what is the person with the lowest amount of activity doing? Are they the bottom performer? And trying to, take a hypothesis and then figure out where to find that data to further kind of inspect and be a detective to figure out, is that hypothesis true or false? And how do you kind of move to the next one thing to figure out how to refine your team?
Gotcha. And so if I could summarize here, just to make sure I'm pulling all this together, it's kind of look at the benchmarks, kind of figure out what's good, figure out what the best reps are doing, and then sort of compare the diff between this is what the best rep performance is, or this is what the best rep activity patterns, steps, sequences, what they're doing, and compare it to the people that might need improvement.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really hard, right? So let's say you have 10 reps on your team and you look at the top two. They might be doing two very, very, very different things. And so you have to start somewhere. You have to figure out, are there any patterns that you're noticing, right? So is it call volume? Is it time of the day that they're calling? Is it emails that they're sending, and whether volume or quality? Are they sending more LinkedIn touches? Are they calling into a different geography? There's probably, 1,000 different elements that you can inspect. And so often it's, layering on a couple people, finding those similarities or dissimilarities, and figuring out, what are the one or two things that you as a sales leader think are the most impactful to change or to test. And so in that example, if your top two have the highest calls and your bottom two have the lowest calls, that's probably a really great place to start testing. But it might be, times of the day calling or a geographical place. So again, it's really about, looking at all of the elements compared to each other and trying to figure out what is that benchmark that you want to test against, and then putting a path forward to test against that to either prove or disprove your theory.
Love that. I love how you're starting with the benchmark. I want to sidebar a little bit because I just had a conversation with a couple of SDRs earlier today. This morning? Yes. Let's call it this morning. And we've got two SDRs. I know they're both good. One had a great month last month. One had an okay last month. The one that had an okay last month is having an amazing March. The one who had a great last month is having a very mediocre February. I'm like, I know I have two good people here. The one who's having a great March is following a very different process. It's a totally different style. And so I'm looking and I'm like, okay, it's a judgment call. I've got two SDRs with different styles and it's working. So do I just say, hey, you copy, like this style is working this month, just copy paste exactly as it is, even though you're a different SDR with a different set of skills? Like, so I guess first off, what would you do in my situation? And then two, like, how do you address differences of style and kind of match that to the skill sets of your reps?
Yeah. So this might be an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. I am a big fan of, choosing your own adventure that works for you. And so for me, I've seen very, very successful reps be very low volume activity producers and highly personalized. And I've seen the reverse true. And I think that it's important to lean into those styles and benchmark against themselves. And so in that scenario, when you've got two reps that are both good, and every rep has ebbs and flows every single month, that's normal. It's taking their own set of data, looking at their own conversions across various different metrics, whether it be activity or number of accounts they're touching or number of contacts, etc. Benchmarking it themselves to find the trends within themselves where they're most optimal. And so, for example, rep A, maybe a high volume rep, and maybe in that, let's say in February, they did 1,000 activities, and that was pretty consistent every month prior. And then March, they're now at, 600. It would make sense. They're probably falling behind against themselves because they're lower than their own benchmark. The other rep may have done 500 consistently, and now is doing 200, and maybe they're actually stronger. For them, that to me would be a sign that highly personalization is actually better for them, and so that would be the trend. And so it's really about identifying, for them, where are their strengths and weaknesses? How do they perform against themselves to figure out how to optimize their own performance versus comparing against one another.
Totally fair. And I love the conclusion or the distinction of some reps are high volume reps, some reps are personalized high quality reps, and everybody's got kind of a style that works for you. I don't know how controversial it is, but I think my opinion on the subject is you have to earn your ability to, you got to earn the trust, right?
Agreed.
If I hire an SDR and they're like, oh, I'm really good at email and I'm going to book all my meetings through email, it's like, I better see some emails or some award-winning emails and meetings booked happen in the first week. And if you're 3 weeks in and you say you're this, email rep and you haven't booked any meetings, you're losing that trust. And everybody starts with a little bit of trust, but you're not putting any more trust in the jar. You're emptying it out. And it's like, okay, well, you're 3 weeks in, that hasn't worked. Now what do we do? And I think what I default to is like, okay, we gave you some wiggle room, and probably, I don't know about 3 weeks, but I might do 2 weeks. And all right, you've got, you're batting zeros for 2 weeks in a row. Now we're going to do it the high volume way until we can see some consistency there. And then you can start layering back in the higher quality approach.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think the important thing about what I said that I maybe didn't mention is you still need a benchmark to start your own assessment. And so, I mean, the story maybe makes sense a little bit later, but when I had first joined Salesforce last year, or I guess 2 years ago now, I had reps that were, really low volume at producers, and then some that were really high volume, and performance was all over the place. And what I said to my team was, hey, I'm going to ask for 60 days where everybody is doing the exact same amount of activity, plus or minus, 100 or 200 activities. But within a certain benchmark, everybody needs to do 1,200 activities, no matter what, for 60 days. After that 60-day period, if you have earned the right to prove to me, based on your conversions, based on what the data tells me, that you are a rock star emailer and the phone doesn't work for you, 100%, that's going to be our plan for the next 60 days following. And we're going to prove your own theory. But until we have your benchmark, there's no way for me to make that decision. And I think that people, including sales leaders, actually have, they often make assumptions about themselves. So they say, oh yeah, I'm the best emailer. And it might be because those conversions feel better for them, but it actually might not be true, but they may really, really believe that it's true. And so for me, often it's about validating, is your theory true or not true? And once we validated it, then great. We validated this. Now we can move on to the next thing to better improve your sales skills. So that's kind of my own methodology, but I totally agree. I think you need to earn the right. And I think you still need you need to start on a benchmark and then decide from there, whether you need to decrease or increase activity based on that benchmark.
100%. Show me that you can do the basics, and then we can start playing with the more advanced stuff.
For sure.
Awesome. So if we've got so let's go back to the initial example. We're managing a team of AEs. We've done a benchmark of them. We can see, okay, this is roughly what we've done. Let's say we've even done the kind of 60 days thing. You're observing that, okay, this is the number one thing that I think I want to focus on. And maybe before I do that, and before we get into how do I go about implementing, why only one thing? Why pick the top thing? Why not say, hey, here's the top 3 things, go change these things. I'll do a training on each.
Yeah. And I think that's where we default, right? I've been in a lot of organizations where they're like, hey, you need to do call coaching and you need to focus on email quality and everybody needs to be at 1,200 activities. And they also need to be doing this spiff to increase marketing conversions. And oh my gosh, reps are so distracted. And it's really, really hard for them to focus on their job, which is optimizing performance and hitting their targets. That is their job. And so it's really distracting when you're focusing on a lot of different things. And really, probably more importantly, is it's really hard to figure out what's working and what's not working when you're changing a lot of things at the same time. And so I've been there where I've told my reps, hey, you need to hit this much activity. I need you calling during these times of the day, yada, yada, yada. And then I go back and I'm like, crap, I actually don't know which one was the one that was working. And so you're kind of back to square one. And so you're actually losing time by focusing on too many things at once versus gaining time and gaining traction to optimize performance in the future.
I learned this the hard way. I used to teach kids and actually adults. I taught learn to play hockey and adult learn to play hockey. And so 18 to 45-year-olds and 3 to 5-year-olds. And think about a 5-year-old skating around who could barely skate. And you're like, okay, what I want you to do is this, this, and this. And they're like, I'm just going to skate. Okay, we need to make it. Because I used to teach power skating to more advanced kids and adults, and we would do all these fancy turns and this and that. And the first time I had kids out, I was like, all right, we're going to do this drill, and it's these 3 things is we're going to focus on. And the kids just he was sort of I don't know, in kicking a beehive. They all just kind of went their own separate ways. And it's like, okay, everybody line up in the corner. You're going to do this one thing. We're just going to focus on this one thing, because otherwise they didn't get it. And I'm not calling SDRs toddlers. I had the similar level of coaching myself where if I'm going into a call and my sales manager was like, okay, what I want you to do is when you do the discovery, I want you to do this. And then when you get to pricing, I want you to do this. And then when you get to this, and it adds this 40% overhead of trying to remember what Steve said to me before the call And so I'm filtering everything through that. And it's too much like overhead of my own mental capacity dedicated to listening or remembering what Steve said. And then I've only have 60% left to listen to the customer. Is it similar, or am I just defective as a human?
No, no, definitely not defective as a human. It's the same as, I mean, it should be the same for everybody. I mean, as a sales leader, I do the exact same thing. I pick one thing that I want to focus on every month with my team. And it's not, hey, I want to do practice discovery and I want the team to get better at demos. And I also want them to practice their negotiation. That's not helpful. It's distracting, and they kind of get like maybe ever so slightly incrementally better in each of them, but not enough to make a really big difference. Whereas if I can focus on one thing, get them 50% better, and then the next thing 50% better, I'm getting way more benefit long term from that versus these incremental changes. And so even selfishly as a leader, it's one thing. And I think everybody should live by that philosophy, because it's like the thing about multitasking. You shouldn't multitask because you actually get less done. I think it's the same theory and the same principle.
Totally. I'm like opening up a doc so I can write a note to myself. I'm like, next month equals, or like prospects only. We're going to check in weekly. Because it can get a little bit squirrely when you're trying to do 7 different things and like I struggle to keep track of like, okay, well, we're working on this with this person and this with this person. I love the whole, all right, everybody on the team, this is what we're going to focus on.
There's actually there's a book about this. It's called The One Thing. It was recommended to me by one of my mentors. I highly recommend everybody read it. It has really nothing to do with sales, but it is 100% about this theory of picking one thing. So what is your North Star, and how do you only work towards that one thing before you kind of take on more? So anyway, if you haven't read it, you should read it.
Cool. I think I started reading it, and I think it felt a lot like 2 other books I'd read, and then I was like, I've read this. I put it down. But you're the 3rd person who's recommended it to me, so I'll pick it up. We're 3rd person recently who's recommended it. I'll get it. So we've decided on, okay, this is the one thing that we're going to make. We've read the one thing, the book, and how do you go about making that change? So what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds really basic when you break it down, but I think it's important to consider a few things. So one, looking at the data, deciding what's your benchmark. So for me, it's like, okay, what's my hypothesis? My hypothesis is, again, in simple terms, more activity equals more meetings. That's my hypothesis. Okay, great. Where do I find the benchmark data for that? Okay, so I go into Salesforce or Outreach or SalesLoft or wherever your data source is, hopefully Salesforce preferably, and you figure out, okay, now what's my benchmark? Over time, it doesn't even need to be today. Over time, what has been the optimal amount of activity that people have output that has increased, like had the most conversions? Also, what are my top performers doing? So now I've got a couple benchmarks. I figured out, this is what I want to do. Then I would time bound it. So, SMART goals, it's really important to time bound, but also to be realistic, right? If you think that you're going to increase activity for a week and see changes, you're kidding yourself. And the amount of, again, sales leaders I've seen in my career do this, where they're like, hey, we're going to do this like high activity for 1 week and see what happens. It doesn't happen like that. If all of a sudden people are doing higher activity, it takes time for them to get into that rhythm, to gain the momentum. They're putting probably more touches on their accounts over that time. And so you need to be patient, which is difficult when you're trying to optimize performance, but you do need to be patient and give it a realistic time frame to make sure you truly can measure the output. So that would be the next thing, is really like, what does that time frame look like for you to provide a meaningful amount of output data at the end? And then it's really, for me, about breaking it into micro goals. And so how I would typically do something like that, if it was 1,200 per month, it would be, hey, you have to do 300 activities per week, which works out to about, whatever that is, about 60 a day. And then divide your day by, if maybe your Mondays are admin days or however you want to divide it, but divide your days accordingly so you're pacing towards that 300 every single week. And so then for me, it's about breaking it down to micro goals and then ideally reflecting on that weekly as well. And so in that again, in that scenario, I would look at weekly and figure out, if there's people that are missing, how do I hold them accountable and how do I push them next week then to hit that target? Because it's really hard to just say, hey, now just go do this one thing without really holding people accountable, helping, potentially refine their calendars, remove meetings or blockers in their day. And so then it's about, removing the obstacles, holding people accountable or yourself accountable and making sure that you are pacing towards that one thing. And then at the end, looking at the data and then reflecting against your benchmarks and deciding, did you prove, disprove, or neither of them? And you need to maybe find a new theory.
Sounds like you've done this before, like maybe once or twice or
a couple times.
Cool. I don't know if people could hear me typing. I was taking a furious amount of notes because I'm most definitely copy and pasting this. Sidebar, this is the best part of running a podcast. I'm like, I find people that are great at doing things that I suck at, and I'm like, I'm just going to take notes. And hopefully the conversation is valuable to everybody else. So we kind of talked about, this is the process if I'm a sales leader. How would it differ for an individual contributor? I imagine it's much the same of like hypothesis, benchmark, time-bound, micro goals, reflect weekly, and then look back. What would you see as being different if you're an individual contributor and you don't have that manager that's helping you with this process?
Yeah. So if you're an individual contributor, assuming you're on a team, for me, it's about comparing, who are the reps that are like you in style, we'll call it. So in prospecting style, if this was a BDR, SDR, who are the reps you aspire to be like? And what are the top performers doing that are different than you? And so, every sales manager or org has a dashboard of some kind. And there's a lot of data on there. And it's funny, I actually went through this exact exercise with one of our BDRs recently. And there's a lot of data to go through that. You got calls, you got connects, you got connect rates, you've got LinkedIn and mails, meeting set. I mean, there's 20 different data points, right? And it's hard to really distill that down. And so it's about, for you, figuring out, a gut feel of like, this is what I think, or this is the feedback I've been told. This is the information I want to find. I'm going to go try to find a way to get that information myself. And I think it's important to not be afraid to ask for help if you need to build, Salesforce reports or whatever you need. And then again, it's about, reflecting on that data month over month and really taking time to pause and look at, okay, base activity is only one part of the picture. I think that's an important part of the picture. But more importantly, actually, for a BDR, SDR, as somebody who's prospecting, I think it's looking at the qualitative. So, the industries, the time of the day you're calling, the personas you're calling, the number of touch points you're putting on an account. Where is that account located geographically? Are you calling different geographical regions frequently? And trying to benchmark again against the top performers and yourself. Where are the areas that I can improve, or what are people doing that I'm not doing that I should try? And so it's hard though, because I think that as a rep, you have a lot of biases. And I've heard this before. When I was, a leader at a former company, I was saying, hey, you guys need, my team's accounts at the time were 20% install customer base accounts. They were allowed to prospect into them to create new upsell opportunities. The 80% were net new, greenfields, nobody touched them before, there was no opportunities in there. And I said to my reps, hey, you should be spending all of your time in your new logo accounts, with the exception of maybe, 10% should be in your install base. And all of them were like, yes, I spend all of my time in new logo, all my time. And I was like, okay, that's great. And if I'm being honest, I just trusted them that was true. I didn't even look at the data. I never once looked at it for months, because to be honest, they thought it was true. It wasn't that they were lying to me. They thought it was true. And so once I looked at the data, I actually found the opposite was true. They were spending 80% of their time in install and 20% in 80% of their accounts. No wonder there was a problem and conversions were low. But again, they believe themselves, because when you're doing something for so long, and those new logo accounts probably felt really, really hard. And so it felt they were spending so much time there. But again, it wasn't true. And so I think as a rep, it's a lot harder to introspectively find those gaps, where it's a lot easier for a manager. And so it takes a little bit more time as an IC to really be able to do that, and then to hold yourself accountable. And so, let's say you pick your one thing, you kind of create your 60-day plan. My recommendation then is, ask a friend, either bring a friend along with you on the same ride, or ask your manager to hold you accountable. Like, find somebody who's going to be your accountability buddy, and to also kind of encourage you along the way, because there's times where it will be really hard and you'll feel like maybe this was a mistake and you'll want to quit. So I think that's important too.
I think at the bare minimum, if you're an individual contributor, taking the time out of your day to reflect, to write this down in a doc, and like find a way to track and measure your progress is such a huge piece. I'd say if your goal is to be a top rep, this is going to be worth the extra hour a week it takes. When you do this, say you're doing it for yourself, an hour a week, half an hour a week, to not to do all the testing and things, but like, how much time are you putting into the management of the process if you're an individual contributor?
Honestly, it shouldn't take a lot of time. Like, I obviously geek out over data. I think that data is a superpower for salespeople, and not enough people leverage it. I used to have a Google sheet. I did this for myself, and I used to do this for my team. And as everybody knows, creating reports in Salesforce and creating the conversion data, the actual percentages of conversions, is like really difficult. So I just default always, when I'm struggling and it's taking me too much time, to Google Sheets. And it's just like a forever tracking place, right? And so when I was a rep, I had, week over week, the things I wanted to track, the numbers, I would have the calculations for the conversions, and I would reflect at the end of each week. Is it higher or lower than last week? Is it higher or lower than last month? Am I tracking on pace? I had a pacing percentage. It takes, 10 minutes to copy this data out of Salesforce. It takes 10 minutes to reflect. And then it maybe takes you, 30 minutes maybe to time block your calendar, make sure you're holding yourself accountable, putting those reminders, and really making sure you make the time for whatever that change is. So yeah, to your point, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's more about the intent and the will versus the actual time to make this happen.
Love it. I think it's sort of the opposite of kind of the next thing I wanted to bring up, which is, sometimes when you have those reps that are struggling and maybe they don't have the experience or the ability to do that self-reflection, and maybe they've made it onto a PIP. This is we talked a little bit in the pre-interview about how reps have earned the ways off PIPs. Pardon me. For those who are like curious, like, what is a PIP? Performance Improvement Plan. Typically, this is brought in when a rep is off quota for a period of time, and it'll document, okay, I expect you to do this, and this by this period of time, or you're not going to work here anymore. First off, is that the performance improvement plan process kind of summarized? Second question is, let's talk about reps you had a couple of reps that earned their way off PIPs, which is amazing. It's one of my favorite things in the whole world when that happens. I hate putting reps on PIP, but I will do it. And it just makes me smile all over when I see them get off, and I'm like, hell yeah, you made it.
I agree. Number one, yes, you were absolutely correct. Number two, I think there's really only two reasons people end up on PIPs. One, they don't have the will, or two, they don't have the knowledge of how not to get on one. And so the beauty of a PIP, actually, if you unfortunately get to one, is that you have a plan in front of you on how to get off of it. So if you have the will, and it was more so a lack of skill or ability to figure out how to do the job effectively, you now have this extremely well thought out plan that your manager or your company has put together for you on a path to get off of it. And so I find with performance plans specifically, when you can look at the data and really figure out, why somebody has been struggling and really spend the time to, listen to calls or to review emails and really go through that journey together. Sometimes the story is really straightforward. But it's often just about really laying out the data and giving the rep sometimes access to that data to be able to make those informed choices themselves, or sometimes to make them believe that this is the right path forward. Because sometimes they don't believe that what you're saying from a coaching perspective is actually the right thing for them until they see the proof in the pudding, right? And so that's where the data is really helpful.
I think that's an interesting point. We didn't talk about this in the pre, so I'm going to surprise you with a question, but
All right.
can we maybe talk about what does a good PIP look like? Not from a formatting perspective, but like what should somebody include? Because I could see, I think I've seen a number of different formats and versions. I've probably been on them myself. I've definitely been on them myself. I've been fired from a sales job. And there's nothing that really galvanizes your an experience of like, don't do that again. Or like, I should have done that better. And I still can think about when I was like selling roofing and I was getting I was getting starved of leads and sent to all the leads in the bad areas. And like guys were literally taking leads off my desk. No, this is my fault because I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. And I got let go after 3 months because I didn't close nearly enough. 100% on me. But at the time it was a very like, it's been over 50 years and I still remember this experience. So like, how does one, I didn't get a PIP plan. It was just like, you're done. I'm like, okay, fine. Didn't like the job anyway. Selling roofing wasn't my favorite thing to do. I fell off a roof, didn't like it. And let's talk about what a good PIP looks like so that we can give reps the best chance of earning their way off.
Yeah. I think, the theme of this podcast is data, right? And I think it's important. I think there's a couple things. I think for one, a good PIP should have both qualitative and quantitative elements, right? I think, unfortunately, I've seen really great reps that have really bad attitudes. They're not a good team player. They lack a lot of the team or corporate or whatever skills to be a part of that specific organization. And it's a really tough place to be as a leader when, somebody's really performing, but just not the right culture add and not elevating the rest of the team. And so for me, when I think about like, what does a good team member look like? Are you giving 100% of yourself every day? Are you trying? Are you coachable? And are you self-aware of what that looks like for you? Are you a good team player? And are you elevating the rest of the team? And sometimes it's not about like providing coaching to the rest of the team. It may be just about having a really great attitude that makes everybody else also want to have a great attitude. And are you honest and innovative? And do you have the grit to do the job? And do you bring your whole self every day? And so those to me are like, if you're doing all of those things and your performance is lacking a little bit, we can work on that. That's actually the easy part. The hard part is the rest of those things. And so for me, a PIP encompasses all of those things. And if you have the right people that are hitting target as a benchmark, it's very easy, in my opinion, to put that plan in place of like, hey, here's where you've been, here's the average, here's where I'd like you to be, and here's the path how we're going to get there. So it may be, hey, week one, this is what I expect. Let's say it's call conversions are really low or something. If it was a BDR, okay, here's what we're going to do from a call coaching perspective. We're going to do this week. We're going to do this the second week, and then we're going to do this the third week. And the third week, if we're not improving, here is a backup plan that we're going to implement to give like a round 2 to fix this one problem, right? And so I think it's about very tangible steps of how to get somewhere backed by data. So in that 2 or 3 or 4 week mark, if it's a 2 month or whatever, a long PIP, they actually have something to look at that is showing improvements to keep them going throughout the duration of that PIP and be excited to get off it and know they're actually improving for themselves. So again, maybe to summarize a little bit, I think it's data backed, but it's got enough of the qualitative metrics that, you look for in a team player and you need in a salesperson. It's got week by week or day by day plan and step forward on how they're going to get there and achieve those goals. And then it's got you as a manager also built into that on like, it's on us too as leaders. So what am I going to do to make sure you're doing these things? And what am I going to do to help you through these things? And there's been PIPs where I went and did all the exact same trainings as them just to know that they, like, I was in it with them and I wanted them to get off that PIP. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
I love that. I love how detailed it is. I thought it might be just a helpful piece if there's new sales leaders on that are listening that might hopefully are taking notes or might be taking notes if they haven't had to do this before, because it is one of those like, all right, put them on a PIP. And like, how do I do that well?
Yeah. It sucks.
One tool, it sucks. Yeah. One, maybe not tool. It's kind of a tool. We follow a system called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, here at PR. We kind of follow a modified version of it. We created a scorecard, and we kind of do like quarterly, not performance improvement plans, but development plans with everybody. So it's kind of the positive version of this. Every quarter we look at the scorecard. The scorecard starts with the values. You get a +1 for showing an example of, okay, I have a story of, or I've seen an example of you living this. You get a 0 for no examples, and then a -1 for living in conflict. So we always start with the values. That's kind of normal. The thing that I stole from EOS, I was like, this is really smart, was gets it, wants it, has the capacity.
I like
so
that.
We go values, GWC. Get it? Do you understand the role and how it comes together at this company with this team, right? Wants it, self-explanatory, has the capacity. Do they have the hours, the training, the knowledge, the ability to do it? And what I like about that is it really helps you. I have the rep fill out, or I have the individual I'm working with fill out their scorecard ahead of time, and then I fill out the scorecard. And to your point, I always pick one thing. I'm like, hey, everything's good. Maybe not everything's good, but like, this is the you're doing a great job. Here's the highlights. Here's the one thing to focus on. I don't do the shit sandwich. It's more of like a poopy open face sandwich. You just go like, these are the good. This is the area of focus. But the GWC gets it, wants it, has the capacity piece. For whatever reason, it stuck on my brain as a very great way to triangulate in on what specific area. Is it culture fit? Is it you don't want the job? Is it?
Yeah, I think that's great. I've done similar things in the past. I really like the gets it, wants it thing. I think I'm going to steal that. So thank you for now giving me something. The funny thing about what you're saying is it provides a benchmark, right? And so going back to, again, a bit of the theme of the podcast is finding those benchmarks, leveraging those benchmarks and measuring against those benchmarks. And so the great thing about, that process is you always have that benchmark, and it makes PIPs really easy actually for both sides. And sometimes a rep will thank you or be kind of thankful when it's over, because sometimes they don't have the capacity to walk away themselves. And so I think that's great because it really, introspectively brings some of that self-awareness.
100%. I am very grateful I got fired from that job because I didn't like it, and I'm not a quitter. Like, I just would not have quit. 100%.
Yeah.
I was at a huge commission basis too, and I would have made zero money for like 6 months and being like, well, I'm moving back in with mom and dad.
Yeah. I mean, I see it a lot, right? It's like, how are you motivated? Is it money? Is it pride? Is it praise? And a lot of people won't quit. And so it's really tough as a leader. And I've seen a lot of reps very thankful. So anyway.
Taylor, I really appreciate you sharing. It's been amazing to get a chance to know you and learn a little bit about your process. If there are SDRs or AEs that are on the call and they're like, I'd love to work for Taylor, she sounds awesome, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yes, LinkedIn is the best way to come find me. I think my LinkedIn is Taylor Dawn Jones after the hash, the sign. Yeah, I'm found on LinkedIn, so happy to connect with anybody.
Awesome. And respect for you got your full name, no like numbers or digits or anything else in it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's still that early. I don't know how that happened, to be honest. Taylor Jones is a very popular name, so the Dawn maybe really helped, but anyway.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'll throw a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. And if anybody's looking to get in touch, LinkedIn is the best place. Taylor, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.